who were in the mafia, what's your story? I am a reformed criminal. I can't excuse my old life, but in many ways, I feel I've made amends. I was never charged or arrested for my crimes because I decided to get out while I still could. After I joined the military, I did 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. As a kid, I was heavily involved in martial arts. By the time I was 20, I was doing amateur mixed martial arts and cage fighting. I held 2 black belts. 1 in traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu and 1 Brazilian in jiu-jitsu. A lot of Asian guys came to the underground fights and they made money betting on me. They would buy me drinks and ask me to hang out with them. They were members of the Asian Boys gang, which at the time in LA, was the last gang you wanted to mess with. Eventually, one of them brought a Russian friend of his and offered me a job as a bouncer in a Russian-owned nightclub. It was rave-style trance music, full of all walks of life. It didn't take me long to figure out that the Russian dudes who ran the place were in the Russian mafia. They had some sort of partnership with the Asian Boys, who handled their muscle and ran the substance trade. I ended up trying X and loved it. Within a few months, I was dealing it. Soon, the Asian Boys came to me and explained that I was dealing on their turf. But it wasn't an argument or anything. They were actually really respectful but told me that they couldn't tolerate me dealing in the club. They insisted it was their market. Then I made a stupid decision. I said, look, I kick your guys out all the time for dealing here. And the cops come in a lot. How about you sell it to me and I'll push it for you in the club? I can move more than your guys, plus I know when the cops are around. They actually liked the idea. I was Irish, so there was no way they were going to recruit me into the Asian Boys. But they treated me like one of their own. I went to all of their house parties and they provided me with an endless stream of Asian girls. Before long, I was earning about $2,000 a week after kicking money upstairs to them and eventually the Russians. I saw people get busted before, so I was never flashy with my money. I drove an old 80s Toyota and stayed in my little apartment. I didn't want any attention, and both the Asian Boys and the Russians loved that. As a bouncer, I had to get violent with a lot of people. And that slowly turned into getting violent with people who owed me money. The same went for my competition. I was confronted by a Latino gang member who had a problem with me for no reason. He made threats to me and put a lot of stuff out on the street about me. The Russians and the Asian Boys sat me down and said, look, you have to handle this. If he is talking about our operation here, then that's going to attract a lot of attention. We already knew there was a gang task force on the Asian Boys and that undercover cops were coming into the club. So I started using mules to do my deals to insulate myself. And they ended up doubling my business. Finally, a Latino gangster came to the club and got caught with a gun that he was trying to get in with. He went to jail that night, and while in the county jail, someone slit his throat. Not me or anyone I knew had anything to do with it. But the Russians and the Asian Boys thought I did. Sooner or later, the Latino gangster was destined to talk trash to the wrong person. It was bound to happen. I let them think that I had it done because I didn't know what else to do. But I didn't say a word. That ended up gaining me a lot of credit, and a lot of business opportunities came my way. All illegal, of course. But in the minds of the Asian Boys and the Russians, I was confirmed as one of them. I started up a parts carrying business that moved parts between factories during various stages of production. I was only 24 and making about $20,000 a month. One of the factories was, of course, owned by a Russian dude. He had a scam going to launder money through his joint by falsifying parts that never existed to justify money transfers. One day, I got sent for by the Russians. They wanted me to meet them at one of the clubs in the middle of the day, which was unusual. I was scared. But for the most part, I made money and I wasn't an idiot. So I knew they had no reason to harm me. When I got there was my main boss and 3 other guys I didn't know. They were all Italian. Not from New York, but Italy. They were members of 'Ndrangheta, the Italian mafia in Europe. They were hooked up with the New York mafia and wanted an X-Connect. They told me that their old source in Arizona had dried up. I didn't want to become their source for 2 reasons. First, if their original source dried up, then that meant they had heat on them. Second, I was afraid I would be getting into something that I couldn't get out of. I told them to wait a few days while I set something up. Here I was, now a 25-year-old kid, sitting across from real mafioso in their 40s and 50s. I went to the Asian Boys and asked them how much more X they could get me. I was dealing about 500 pills a week already. They told me they were maxed out and that it was getting harder to move. I knew it came from China and up through Mexico. I told them that if they could up it to 5,000 pills a week, I knew someone who could move it for them. They wanted proof, so they gave me 5,000 pills on loan. They had zero problems getting a hold of it seconds after they claimed they couldn't get it. I went back to the Italians and sold it to them for $50,000. I went back to the Asian Boys and gave them the money. No profit for myself. They were ecstatic. They ended up showing me their whole operation that supplied several US cities. Vegas, Salt Lake City, Louisiana, San Diego, Miami, and so on. They never wanted to tell me how big they were before. But now that I moved that much for them, I was in. I went back to the Italians and they said they could move those pills in New York in less than a week. Then they asked me for 40,000 pills. I thought that was a huge stretch, so I told them I would have to see. I went back to the Asian Boys and to my surprise, they changed their tune. They were more aggressive than usual and it seemed like they were maybe a little jealous. I was always looking for an out because I knew that it was only a matter of time before I got fingered by a gang task force. I decided to make them an offer that I thought was a long shot. I told them that we had done good business for 3 years at that point and we partied a lot together. I told them that they were my friends and I didn't want anything to happen to them. I told them that I found out there was a detective who made one of my customers testify. I made up a person and said she was one of my customers. I said that after getting arrested, she disappeared on me. It was a total lie. I said that she got out of jail and the next day her apartment was empty. Everyone agreed that it sounded like she went into protective custody. I told them that I didn't want to do business with them anymore because I was afraid all of us would get busted. But I told them that I would hook them up with my connection who wanted the 5,000 pills and that they wanted to move a lot more. They saw the logic in what I was saying. By removing myself as the middleman, they would be able to expand and drop whatever heat I had on me. Of course, they told me that we were friends, but they reminded me that if I walked away after they let me and I ended up flipping, they would kill my family. There was an old man there who I heard was a member of the Chinese triad. He got angry at them for giving me that threat and yelled at them in Chinese. A minute later, someone came back with a bottle of scotch and poured shots for everyone. Suddenly my hair started standing up on the back of my neck. I had a feeling they were going to kill me. But we drank and everything seemed fine. A few days later, myself, the Italians and the Asian boys sat down in a steakhouse and I introduced everyone. Everyone just talked about sports, politics, the news and whatever else. No business, just introductions. I knew to do this because it was the Omerta way. Italian La Cosa Nostra does it that way and it is considered off limits to discuss business over dinner. One guy whose name was Furio walked me outside to talk. I think he stole the name from The Sopranos. But I wasn't going to tell him that. He wanted to know if I was getting a piece of the deal or if the Asian boys were muscling in on me. I told him that I am not the type to be muscled. I said that I would go after families as quickly as they would. I lied because I never killed anyone and I didn't intend to. But I knew I couldn't start stuff by accusing the Asian boys of muscling me. And I couldn't come off like a wuss either. I told Furio that I worked for the Russians. I said the Asian boys didn't have a beef with me and didn't want one with the Russians. He had me follow him out to his car so he could give me something. I was scared. He opened up his truck and I pictured myself getting thrown in. I turned my body as if expecting someone to come up behind me. Furio sees this and laughs. "You watch too many movies," he said. He told me that if he wanted to do anything to me he would pay a couple of monkeys to do it for him because they fit in better in jail. Instead, he pulled out a velvet bag and handed it to me. "That's for you for tonight." I walked out to my car without looking at it. I didn't want to look at it in front of him for some reason. He got in his car and drove off. I opened the bag in my car and saw it was a 2-pound gold bar. Worth about $15,000 at the time. I still have it to this day. I had a nest egg of about 6 figures saved up and I left town for a suburb. I ended up getting a few jobs in security and was glad to be out of that life. I ran into one of the Asian boys about 6 months later who was coming out of a restaurant as I walked in. It was odd seeing him in the suburbs and I was suspicious. I was with a girl who was pretty hot and he checked her out. I told her to go inside and get us a table. The Asian boy just complimented me and we caught up for a minute. He laughed and asked, "So did you change your name and stuff?" I was relieved because I knew that he figured I had gone on the run to avoid getting arrested. I told him that I was going by a different name and just laying low. I told him that I didn't know if I could get back in or not. He told me that I shouldn't. He shocked me when he said that no one can do it forever. He said he would get out, but he needed the money. We exchanged numbers and that was it. I never saw him again. About a year later, 2 things happened that changed my life. I saw on the news that LA conducted a huge bust and took down the Asian boys. I saw guys I knew being led in cuffs. I took it as it meant that I was officially out of that life forever. Which was my intention. I later found out that one of the mafioso was a DEA agent. It couldn't have been Furio because he gave me gold. A DEA agent would not have done that. It turned out that the Russian I worked for was pinched for something and agreed to give up the largest X-ring in LA in exchange for immunity. The Russians are pretty wily like that. They won't give up on each other but will sell out a partner. I was fearful that my initial deal with them would mean they would come after me and arrest me next. They never did. I eventually figured that I was perceived as a carrier rather than a dealer. The next thing that happened that changed my life was 9/11 that same year. I felt that I wanted to do something with meaning and leave criminal activity behind completely. I was pissed that the USA was attacked so I joined the military. 18 years later, I'm out of the military, a combat veteran and own my own legit business.